Hello, friends. Welcome to today's episode of Gregor's podcast series, Decoded by Dr. Rajashri. First, let me thank each one of you for the incredible response that we have got for this series. This is truly encouraging. Healthcare sector, as we all are aware, is really evolving at an unprecedented pace. Thanks, driven by evolving technologies, advancing therapies, and most importantly, rapidly changing patient expectations. So now this is giving rise to a very important question. Is today's healthcare really future ready, especially pharma? And that's exactly what is the theme of today's podcast. And to explore this, I'm delighted to be joined by Mr. Shailesh Gadre, a seasoned entrepreneur and a strategist with over 3 decades of experience. He has a remarkable journey, starting from leadership roles at IMS Health, today's IQVIA, and Nicholas Piramal, to building diverse ventures across the healthcare ecosystem. His work spans from building up biotech companies, pioneering dental stem cell banking in India, to innovation licensing, hospital advisory, investment banking, and health tech, including Gregor Analytics. So, with this multifaceted perspective, he truly brings a unique lens to answer what we are putting up as the theme of today's podcast, what it really means to be future ready. I have been associated with him for over 20 years, including as a business partner. And I'm very confident that this podcast is surely going to be will be very candid and have insightful conversations. A CA, CS, ICWA by academic qualifications. So for him, everything boils down to sheer numbers. So even the brief given to me is that 10 questions and nothing more. So now the ball is again in my court. Frame the right questions so that we get very good insights from this conversation. So once again, welcome Shailesh to this podcast. We are really eager to hear from you because I couldn't have thought of any better person to give a perspective which is much more holistic across the healthcare. And so for the benefit of the audience, let's start off with the first question in saying what really led you to start Genoval Strategic Services. So what is that gap which you are really trying to address in this healthcare ecosystem?
Well, thank you very much, Rajashri, for having me on this podcast. And congratulations to you and the Gregor team. I think you guys have done an amazing, series here. I think which is very well received and very well reflected. For me to start this journey on Genoval Strategic Services, frankly, um, in my experience at Nicholas Piramal as well as then at IMS, I came across multiple areas within healthcare and life sciences. So pharma being one of them, of course, the major chunk. But I also had a chance to look at pathology labs, also had a chance to look at hospitals, multiple things. I think one thing that stood out for me always is the way this industry innovates. And I think innovation was somewhere, something that I could not sort of overlook in every situation that I was in. Also, one more thing that is very important, is to look at how businesses are evolving in future. So I don't think any business can today boast of being individual in everything that they do. So you need partnerships, you need people to collaborate with, you need people to work together with in order to deliver any solution that the business aims for. Now, putting these two together, thanks for the introduction that you've told everybody. I'm a CA, ICWA, CS, so I'm sure everybody would have guessed that I can't innovate for sure. So the only way we could add value to innovation was through commercialization. So the underlying theme of Genoval is to how do you help your partners commercialize innovation, and that was the thought process when we started. But more importantly, I want to tell you also what Genoval stands for, and I'm sure you know about it, of course, but for the audience, Genoval stands for Generating Companion Value. And that's what we are looking for each of the business that we've set up. And why companionship and not partnership is because the perceived value of companionship is for a much longer duration, and it is unbreakable bond. So something that we wish to attain, of course, that's the desire, that we want to companion with all the partners to take them to the next level. So if you look at our ventures, we have got a venture in, where we have sort of also dwelt in detail. So we've got a biotech venture in stem cell banking. That is one. Second, recently, about 7-8 years ago, we got into what we call GCViDeal, which is essentially partnering global innovators to bring their innovation into India and launching them here in this market, which is a lot to do in nutraceutical space, as we call it. So these are two ventures in that space. Then we have ventures in knowledge space, which is HealthBridge Advisors, which is basically hospital-focused advisory firm, where we have advised pretty much all the big hospital names with respect to how do they frankly improve their clinical and more importantly their financial performance. And then of course Gregor Analytics, which has been a story in itself, where we provide analytical solutions to the market. So that is a fantastic one. And to stitch them all together, we also want to bring in investors, and those investors came in, predominantly from the perspective of GCV Life, which is been our investment banking, business, and that has stayed with us for all, more than 15 years now. And essentially, we have closed more than 100 transactions in this period of time to look at, how we can bring the investors to look at interesting businesses. And so that's what Genoval's journey is all about.
Yeah. So very interesting. So coming back to what the theme of today's podcast has been, we have been using the word, is today's healthcare future ready? So what for you is future ready, especially if I have to say whether from a pharmaceutical company's lens point of view? And how is it different? How is it different that from the success which could have been probably 10 years back? So has that really changed?
So that's a very interesting question and very interesting topic indeed. So future, frankly, people say future changes, but I think the timelines for future is also changing. Typically one looks at whenever, as a child, I looked at future, I looked at when I was getting old, so that was the journey, that distant. But now I think in businesses, we don't talk beyond 3 to 5 years as future. So we need to be ready for next 3 to 5 years. And that itself is a big task and a big ask, frankly, from businesses, right? So the definition of future itself has changed, one. And frankly, the definition of success has changed, completely. So if you look at success, what used to be success, say 20 years ago, was basically companies were run for profit. Now they are run for valuation. Companies were run for promoters to make money. Now companies are run for investors to make money. Startups are getting started. When I talk to many of these startups, the objective of the startup is, of course, to create value in business, but to look at exits, which were not earlier heard of, at all. But I think future-ready business is a business that will, I'm sorry to say a statement, but basically it is a very, very important statement, is the only constant is change. So change has to be adapted. Change has to be, accepted. We cannot resist this change, whether we like it or not, it will keep on happening. And most importantly, if you really organize yourself well, then you are able to, frankly, even excel within that. And to me, a future-ready organization is the one that is able to bring all these 4 elements together and is able to actually accept the change, be ready for it, and take the next leap, with all the confidence that they can get.
Very interesting. I really like the point in saying that, the definition of future itself has changed. Earlier on, we used to say that, businesses are built up to build up legacies, but now no longer so. It is basically in saying that how quickly you can exit. So very interesting of you. So then whenever we talk about industry and being from the data background that both of us are from, the first question which always used to be asked even 20 years back used to be in saying, where is the growth going to come from? So according to you, where is the next wave of growth coming from?
One thing that you also asked is, is success, right? So I want to just add to that a little bit. lot of times businesses do not succeed, but then they create a space for themselves for other people to succeed. I'll give you a classic example of Byju's. Okay, Byju's as a business model, okay, has not succeeded. I think the whole world knows that what has it done, right? But as a ecosystem that they have managed to create, it's really incredible. I mean, never before was education looked at from the perspective that they looked at it, which is e-commerce based, distant learning,
Sure.
education. That space itself has evolved and changed. Whether you can call the business to succeed or fail is a different point, but they have definitely created a momentum in that particular space and that particular area, right? So if you're talking about what areas in healthcare and pharma will succeed, I have my best five, my favorite five, which I think will succeed. One is preventive care, preventive healthcare. I feel that post-COVID, all of us have become very health conscious and we don't want to fall sick. If you ask the Gen Z, Gen X, whatever they call it, right, and none of them wants to or likes to fall ill. And they're taking every effort to actually look at preventive healthcare. So much so that since we are in that business, I can tell you that clinically proven nutraceuticals, clinically proven probiotics are being looked at very, very, aggressively by these people. They ask you saying that, oh, is there a clinical evidence for this particular ingredient that you're using?
Oh, wow.
And that's simply amazing how they are learning, right? So that's one. Second is biologics. I think I am not as equipped to talk about biologics, but I think everything happening in biotechnology is very, very exciting, including biosimilars, though the journey is long and it gets longer every year. But nevertheless, I think that is a very interesting space to look at. Third is since we are also working in the hospital space, it is medtech. Okay, medtech is a very evolving space. A lot of technology is helping doctors, surgeries, etc. But within that space, I like medtech that is able to go to people's houses. When the consumer buys that particular device and is able to use it from home to provide data and sort of analytics to the medical fraternity, that is even better. So that's the third space. Fourth is, of course, operational excellence. That will not go anywhere. I think that is there to stay as long as it's able to use all possible tools, as long as it's able to use all possible AI, analytics, data sciences, etc., to make it much more efficient, right? And last but not the least is, in my mind, is personalized medicine. I think personalized medicine is going to become a reality soon. Every one of us has got different genes, as they say, and one solution may not fit all in the long run. So we may need to be very specialized in terms of what we are able to offer every customer. So these are 5 future areas that I have at least.
Yeah, I'm very tempted to ask you about personalized medicine, but I do have a question coming up later on, so I'm just going to park it as of now. So when we talked about future ready, we talked about how success definitions have changed, how future has changed. We talked about what is the growth. So I'm going to drive this discussion towards using the guidelines of the P's of marketing or whatever you talk about it. So let me address the first P, which is normally the product. And you have been always talking about innovation because you said in the first thing, what really excited you to even start off the company was that word innovate. So for a future ready organization, what would be a future ready product pipeline? Is it more molecules or is it more differentiation?
So clearly more differentiation. I think there is, having a lot of products, frankly, does not mean much, in my opinion. Having a lot of products, of course, has been the way the businesses have grown in the past, because there has been a basket approach. So people looked at, saying, I have a product basket, I need to have everything in that therapy area so that when I go to a doctor, I'm able to promote and doctor can pick and choose, what he thinks is right, of course. But I think those days are disappearing soon. I think we did a study where we analyzed, frankly, about top 40 companies or 50 companies that our team looked at. And we realized that every company, if you dissect it, they have a Pareto principle, which is 20% of the brands contribute to 80% of the turnover, right? And the remaining 80%, in my opinion, become distractions. So people are spending time on those brands, and those brands are not, going to deliver because in reality, in those areas, they have missed the bus. Long ago, if you recollect, we did an analysis in IMS where we realized that the top 10 players or top 10 launches continue to remain the top, five brands in the industry, unless and until, of course, one of them chooses to do something different. But that's the reality even today. So I mean, one has to look at product pipeline very regularly and very cautiously. One needs to segregate your product pipeline, right? Into in my opinion, they need to segregate it into three buckets, saying which ones I'm going to focus on, which one I'm going to look at maybe acquiring in order to fulfill that cause, and where am I going to generate that capital to acquire those products is by looking at my 80% pipeline, which is not contributing as much to my overall growth in business, right? And frankly, in the last 15 years of being in investment banking, what we have learned is that selling brands is no more a taboo. Actually, a progressive company, I mean, maybe when we started, people used to say, oh, if he's selling a brand or he's selling products, means the company is not doing well. Not anymore. I think companies that are doing well are very smartly unlocking value of the brands that they feel are not going to be future for them, and taking that value and putting it in brands which are going to be their future. So what are they using that money for? They're using that money for acquisitions. They're using that money for in-licensing, because that's another way to grow pipeline. And more importantly, they're also using that money to fund their own innovation. A lot of companies are looking at how they can either capture or be a party to, or look at, co-innovate in multiple ways. And probably that's the right way to go, in my view. So that's the way in which, so a pipeline of product is not going to be a constant. It will always be, something that will have to evolve. I feel every company, at least every 2 years, if not every year, needs to revisit the pipeline and make a decision on which ones they want to stay with and which ones they want to let go.
Just a corollary to this question also, like, when we say that what is going to be the future ready pipeline, one of the things which we always hear in the boardrooms is in saying that, everything is moving from product centricity to patient centricity. So do you really feel it is going to have an impact even on the product pipeline, in saying that we are really going to move from generics to differentiated offerings, and the buzzword now is digital therapeutics? So do you really see this transition happening in the near future?
So I'm a big fan of patient centricity. Okay, I think we did a study while at IMS as well, and we realized that the industry over time is going to move in that direction. Frankly, even in HealthBridge we did a study. Okay, when we looked at hospitals more seriously. In IMS, of course, we looked at pharma more seriously, but when we looked at hospitals also, we realized that our ecosystem, the way it has evolved, has given a lot more importance to to formats like products, like doctors, like hospitals, which are fantastic. I'm not questioning that at all. But I think the person who pays for their medicine is the patient. Okay, and I think he is taking over. He or she is taking over. They are trying to call the shots. Look at the whole success of D2C. Direct to consumer. Direct to consumer is an attempt to take products to your directly to consumers. Of course, these are not drugs. These are not products that have to go under prescription. But nevertheless, these products also get prescribed by doctors. But people prefer to read up. The customer today, or the patient today, is lot educated. They have access to information which probably was not available earlier, and they want to ask questions. So even doctors many times, I sense, are getting irritated because they come up with a lot of Google-led questions for them. But nevertheless, I feel it is very important to to look at patient as a center of your strategy. So I'm very firm believer that if a company keeps patient at the center of their entire strategy, will definitely do better as compared to companies that are just looking at their products. The challenge is, where do we get this information on patient? Because a patient for pharma is a very distant. Doctor prescribes, and because of the regulation, we are not able to access who is the patient and has he really taken the dose the way it was designed to be administered. On the D2C side also, frankly, they try to get as much information, but they don't get full information about the patient either, because though you buy on Amazon, who are you buying for in the family is not a very well known fact, and the profile of that person is also not very easily available, so it becomes challenging to know that information. But I think that is a very important information.
Surely, and some of the things that we are really seeing, even progressive companies in the pharma, where you really are looking out that they're setting up digital companies. So they might be running it as patient programs and so on, but that is also giving rise to real world evidence. So that is also giving a lot of plethora of information in saying that, how is the doctor prescription, how is the patient journey happening, and where it is. So yes, it's still a start, a long way to go for this, but at least the journey has begun. I'm going to shift a bit of a gear and ask you to wear your investment banking hat, because we talked about products. You also did mention about in saying that you can acquire or where it is, instead of always innovating it yourself and acquiring it. Where do you really see all these investments and divestments really happening in the healthcare space?
So I think healthcare, I have not come across any VC or private equity that has told me that they are not interested in healthcare and life sciences till date, out of last 15 years of experience. So this is really, really an area of interest for pretty much everybody. So that's the beauty of this industry, really. So it always is renovating itself and is going to be at the helm of interest. Having said that, we classify investors into broadly two categories. One is financial investors, and second is strategic investors. Right. So financial investors always look for a return on investment, look at exits. So they typically end up investing in startups. They end up investing in companies in medtech. They end up investing in companies that have a duration beyond which, of course, they'll create value, they'll create space, they'll impact the ecosystem. But then there is an exit. Okay, that is going to be there. So that's what they look for. Second category of investors is strategic. Strategic look at actually, sort of aggregating that investment. So they look at buying brands, they look at buying companies, they look at buying, assets which they in the long term can merge with their original or other business. Now, these are very different thought processes with which they approach an investment, because they are not looking at a short term. Typically, a financial investor will look at a 5 to 7 year horizon to exit, and it is because they have to also return back the money. To the LPs, so they have to do that, right? That is not the case with strategic investors. The one big change that I have seen in the last 3-4 years that has emerged is what we call categorically as pre-IPO investors. So this is a segment that has emerged where basically they look at companies that have the ambition to do an IPO in the next 3 to 5 years, and they invest in that company at that point when before they're doing the IPO. So what happens is that at the IPO they may exit and they may be able to create good value for themselves. But these investors come with a very different ask. They are not looking for a board seat. They're not looking, for any reserve matters that a lot of VCs and private equity funds are usually looking at. So in the last 2 years or so, we have done more than four or five transactions with such investors who bring in this money on table and are waiting for when the IPO will happen for them to exit. So this is another category that has really emerged of investors. So I see a lot of deals in healthcare and pharma. I see deals that are coming up, across board, frankly. Pharma, of course, is important and big, but also is medtech, so is hospitals.
2-3 times in your conversation, you did mention about brand acquisitions and selling and all that. So are you really seeing that brand selling is getting preferred over selling of companies? Is it really happening?
Absolutely. I'll give you a story to answer this. One of the transactions that we did is where the promoter, when we met him, they were interested they had an offer on table. Okay, their market cap at that point in time was something like 60, 70 crores. And they had an offer of about 70, 80 crores, which was more than the market cap. And they wanted to do a deal and get out. But when we looked at their brand portfolio, we realized that their brand portfolio was simply amazing. Okay, they had collectively more than 80 to 100 crore worth of brands, and we saw that the profits and everything of those brands was also quite good, you know. So we proposed to them that let us evaluate a brand transaction for a while, and you will be shocked to know that we got them a multiple of nearly four times the value of the brands that they had. So we were able to, go to more than 300 crores worth of transaction for them. Now, the beauty is that this was not appearing in their balance sheet because this is intangible asset. It does not get valued on your balance sheet. So effectively, when you do a traditional way of acquisition, you look at a balance sheet and you value the company. So market cap does not capture this, and that is the beauty of brands. That is one. Second important thing is brand transactions in our experience are much more easier for the buyer also because he's not buying the company. So effectively, he is not buying any liability along with that. He's just buying trademarks and the equity that the brand has already created in the market, and he is able to, take that forward from there. So that's the beauty of a brand transaction. It happens quickly. Due diligence effort is less. It's intangible asset, and the company can run the way it is running. So,
and it would be a win-win situation because as we saw that still the Pareto principle is so very much alive. So 20% is still accounting for 80% of the turnover. Even what is remaining in that remaining part of it, there would be many buyers for these brands also. So they can really create value.
It's a perfect fitment many times because see, what has not worked for a company because of their focus and their priorities may work for somebody else where there is a focus. So it is a win-win, frankly, in brand transactions, that you've seen. So I truly believe that people should review their portfolio and look at how they can encash the value of their brands.
Sure, I think we have spent a lot of time on the first P itself, which is product. But the another part of it, which I want to progress towards and just taking it up to the next P, which is more to do with the promotion. Because earlier podcast and even today's podcast, selfishly, I want to focus on commercial excellence. But when we talk about it, one of the things which came up was, is the commercial model in pharma really going to change? Like, earlier all the stakeholders, business leaders and even COVID has proved it, that the MR model is here to stay. So if that is going to stay, then how is the physician engagement really change in the future, especially when we have such a data savvy, technology driven world? Do you really see a different future in the commercial models?
See, there's a part yes and a part no to the answer. Okay, the part no is very easy. Basically, MRs, like you said correctly, are here to stay, and I can't imagine, at least in our lifetime, a world which is going to be MR free. Okay, and I don't think there's a desire because the human touch is very important. Human touch is important for even doctors, and frankly, the companies, because companies also, sort of touched upon the doctor in that way and understand them better. While technology is fantastic and technology can do wonders, but it cannot replace, the final human element yet. Okay, so I don't know how future is going to evolve, but I think what is very important is the use of all possible gadgets and gizmos. And what these tools give you is, I don't know of any company nowadays who's able to do detailing without an iPad or a similar tool of iPad.
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't come across a doctor who has got more than 1 minute for any MR anymore. So what is happening here is that you have to package every possible message and communication that you are looking to give in that 1 minute to the doctor, because that's the best he can do for you. And if you are not able to really do that, the doctor will have no recall. Okay. So, but if you are impactful there, then the doctor will remember that for a very long time. And frankly, commercial excellence, while of course there is a lot to it, doctor meeting and how you perform at that meeting is one element of it. What is also important is how do you, how do you use all the data assets that are available in order to segregate the market, in order to identify whom to meet, in order to identify where to distribute. So there's a lot, I think, at Gregor, you provide all those kind of capabilities, to the industry. But to me, how to package them in a very smart manner, is very important. I mean, when we were in consulting, many times we were told that, oh, if you see your customer in a lift and you got 14 floors to go down with him, what are you going to say to him?
Elevation pitch,
So that he's going to call you again, and that's what's happening with the MR. So the MRs have to be equipped, they have to be smarter, they have to be trained better. In order to really make the best out of the relationship that they have with the doctor.
Sure. In fact, when we had the podcast with Mr. Alok Malik also, he summed it up very well in saying that, the objective of commercial excellence should be in terms of trying to say how you can make available the ease of business. So to that medical representative, because his task has become very complicated from what the years has been. And I think the same thought was coming out from what your conversation was also in regards to. So yes, while we talk about all this data, digital and everything per se, a quick reality check. Because one of the things which we always talk here today is AI, artificial intelligence. Do you really see artificial intelligence really impacting our industry in the near future?
So I think I'll give you my thought on artificial intelligence first, and then I'll talk about the industry, right? So I think for the first time, and this is a little bit philosophical. So for the first time, I read somewhere that human beings are actually outsourcing intelligence. Human beings are differentiated from most of the animals because of the intelligence that we have. And usually outsourcing works, when you have an expert in either IT or technology or HR or something, and you say that you are expert, you do that very well. So here is what I outsource to you. So if you're outsourcing intelligence, we don't know what's going to happen. Is where I am at right now. But it's very interesting. I think intelligence is going to definitely give us something very miraculous in future, no question. So artificial intelligence cannot be ignored anymore. It is a part of life. It is reality. Having said that, I think there's a differentiation that, at least in my mind, I have, between artificial intelligence and what we call machine learning. Okay, most of the solutions that we are seeing, even in pharma, coming to pharma, are actually coming out of machine learning, because you look at historical data, you process that data, you assemble it together, and then you look at predicting future. To me, that's like an algorithm which keeps on improving itself every time you capture more information and feed to it, right? So that is where we are in pharma, at least to the best of my understanding at this point, that we are using, the intelligence that is available within our, space, in order to improve our efficiency and performance within that space. When you talk about artificial intelligence, it has to also come from outside. So maybe when tools like this start looking at, I don't know, I mean, I'm talking randomly, but look at automobile or look at space sector, and all these areas, we should be then able to, see how things can progress. Right? So,
sure.
I think one more important thing is, I think in order to make the best of this, machine learning as well as artificial intelligence that is coming up, pharma has to also, sort of speed up their entire take up on, because we are still struggling. I won't say struggling, but we are still dealing with the same, problems, which is to do with MR productivity, to identify the right doctors to meet, to look at expiries and claims, to look at tour maps, so that has been sort of the struggle, and that keeps on taking a lot of our time. And I think what is important is to to move fast and get that over with and move to the next level. I feel innovation is another area that will be driven significantly through artificial intelligence.
Okay.
Because it is possibly good. I mean, we work with a company right now. We are helping them raise capital, which is into repurposing, medicine or drugs.
Oh.
So they use, I mean, they take one medicine which is probably for, a cardiac purpose, and then they repurpose it for something else in a different delivery format also. And I
Right.
think, I don't know, but I get fascinated to look at such companies and such innovations. And I feel AI can add a lot of value to shorten the journey to market, because speed to market is the most important, thing in this case.
And yeah, and when we are talking about a time period of 3 to 5 years, all these, the time is the essence of it.
Essence
So
of
if
it.
the data is able to really help us to shorten that time to the market or make it successful, it really connects all the dots over there. So while we were talking about product, we have been talking about promotional models, but I really want to get your views, because of late you are not only on the advisory boards of within the healthcare, but you have also taken up something from outside the industry. So when you sit in these board meetings in and out of the healthcare, do you really see an evolution in the decision making of the leadership or the management? Has it really evolved? Is it still instinct driven? Is it still experience driven? Or is it really now the leaders have started trusting the algorithms, the word which you used in the earlier one? Do they really trust the algorithms, or is it still their instinct?
So, basically, pharma by far I feel is a very fortunate industry. Okay, because I see, if I look at all the pharma companies put together, all of them, or I won't say all of them, but I'll say 80-90% of them are profitable, which is fantastic. More than 20-30% of them at least are debt free, which is also fantastic, right? That is not the luxury available to every industry. So that's why pharma's need for change is probably not as desperate as it is in many other
Right.
boards that I'm involved with, or I'm sitting on, right? So over there the need for change is lot stronger.
Right.
And that's where they utilize the tools, the technologies, the platforms that are available, in my opinion somewhat better than what pharma is still dealing with, right? Because if they don't, they will not be able to show profits, and that is a very important element of their success, right? So that's that's the one part. The second part is decision making in pharma will always become more and more data driven. Okay, we cannot stay away from that. Okay, because frankly so much data is available. If you're not going to make use of it, then it's going to, plus algorithms are something which keep on improving themselves. So I call it a different thing. I call it, one is your data algorithm and second is your experience algorithm. So experience plays a huge role, of course. I mean, one cannot deny that experience is the reason why we are where we are in the industry. But one needs to take into account everything that is available in order to make a more educated decision, right? And every year more data is available. If you choose to use it, that probably gives you a decision. Experience algorithm can be applied after the data algorithm has been used, so that you know everything and then you are making a call. Many times the decision taken through experience could be the right decision also, but then once you have all the information and you're taking that call, then you're taking the call with a lot of information and knowledge. So that's the advantage. Now, to complicate this journey, the lifespan of people, leadership has reduced. Most leadership roles do not exceed 4 to 6 years, so to say, and they have to make a decision in that thing. And if the leaders change, which is a lot of
Happening
changes
now,
happening in the
we see it very
industry,
often.
then process has to survive beyond people. And that's why building the right processes and capturing the right data information to make decisions is going to be pivotal, in my opinion, to the success of of the industry.
Yeah, we see that the onboarding time for the leadership is also squeezed. At the same time, he has to produce results in that 4 to 5 years, because that is also timed. So his exit is also timed. So in that particular case, how can you reduce it? I think data is coming up very handy in that particular aspect.
So my experience with this was when I was at IMS, when I went to meet with David Thomas, if you remember, our global chairman at that time, and we were a class of I think 12 or 13 people who they had sort of picked in order to probably train us for the next roles. And one of the things that he was mentioning every time that next 3 years, next 3 years, next 3 years. So I ended up asking him, why are you talking 3 years? I think we are, as a company, it's going to be beyond that.
Beyond that.
So he laughed and he said, my contract ends at the end of 3 years. so beyond that, the next guy
will take
will
call.
see.
Yeah.
And I said, so does this work? Because, one has to look at a long-term vision and all that. So he looked around and he told me, listen, in America, this is working. American companies are at the top and this is the way they operate. So it clearly is working. The next person will come in and will take charge from where I leave and will have a different direction and will succeed. And look at IMS, they converted to IQVIA. And much bigger market
we ourselves
cap.
have seen so many transitions, because I remember joining as ORG turned out to be IMS turned out to be again IMS Health alone, then it turned out to be IQVIA. In between there was one more company, VNS and all. I don't even remember the names now. But you're right, and every time the leadership change was there, but the company continued and we had to gather it. So as we are coming towards the end of the discussion, there are a couple of questions which I really want to ask you, because we started off, why did you start off Genoval? So it was companion, building up collaborations and all that stuff part of it. And you have seen all the sides of this industry across. When do the partnerships really work? And when do the collaborations actually fail? So all of us agree that it is important, but what are those factors?
So I think nobody can deny that a business cannot be built on a standalone basis anymore. So one person, whoever it is, any company cannot stand up and say that I don't need any partner, collaborators, and I'm going to do everything on my own. That's not possible anymore, right? So that is gone are those days, if at all they were there. Now, one has to, we have learned the hard way, I think partnerships are not easy to get into and maintain. So that is even a bigger challenge. In my mind, there are, 3-4 things that need to be learned by the entrepreneurs in order to, and there is unfortunately no training available yet in that space, is how do you get into and how do you maintain partnerships? So it is very important to look at one, in my mind, there are 3-4 things. One is having a common goal. I think all partners should know very openly as to where are they heading, and they need to create the same thing, what they want to create. Even if it's an exit, they all need to know that 5 years we need to exit. That is, if one of them doesn't feel like exiting or does not have that in the plan, then it's a little bit of a disaster in the making. Second is transparency. I think that is a very, very important element. One has to be very, very transparent, to the partners, because I think a single doubt in anybody's mind can really create unnecessary challenges. Maybe it was not intentional, but nevertheless that happens. Third thing is that there needs to be compassion for each other, understanding for each other, that they need to have. Some partners will have ups and downs, and the other one has to step in and take care of that. That's very important. And last is success has has a lot of two things. Is one is that a success is always built at the back of failures. So unless you are able to take failures, it's very difficult for you to see the success. And one more sort of very important point is is with respect to the fact that you have to be very, very patient.
Yeah,
I know
sounds
we deal with
philosophical,
patience
but
in the
yes,
industry,
yeah, you really require.
But these are the attributes in my mind to create good partnerships that stay long.
Sure. As we wrap up this session, last one question from my side. You have been a CEO for an Indian company. You have been an MD for a multinational company, and now an entrepreneur. What is different among all this?
This is a question that I've been asked before, so I'm quite ready with the answer. I want to give an analogy, actually a situation, okay, to say that there is a very big, very important deal that is happening. Okay, in the first situation, you go there as a CEO of an Indian company, right? You go there and everybody thinks that you have the authority to sign and close the deal. But in your hearts of hearts, you know that you have to call the promoter, who is the big boss, and you have to call him and you have to talk to him. And once he says yes, then you sign the paper and it's done. Of course, you have the authority, but then you know you've got to take the permission. Right? So that's first situation. Second situation is MD of an MNC, and we all have gone through it together. Is again you go to this deal, you think you have the authority, but there are 5 more people in the matrix who also think they have the authority. So if a consensus prevails, then
the things move.
Then the deals happen. When you go in for signing a deal like this as an entrepreneur, okay, the one thing you know is that you have the authority for sure. But the most important part is you don't have the money. So after you sign the deal, your bigger problem starts that where am I going to get the money to execute this particular transaction? So that's the beauty. But that's the fun of entrepreneurship, because if you are able to get the deal, then then that's more important, and then of course everything falls in place if you choose to.
Yeah, it resonates so well because we have gone through this journey together, and really it makes so much more sense. But thanks a lot, Shailesh. This has been a very insightful discussion. As what we started off, that one promise which I had for the audience was in saying that this is going to be very candid and very insightful. So thanks for it. And when we started off with saying future ready, what it is to be a future ready, throughout your conversation, it came up, innovation alone is not going to be enough. Strategy alone is also not going to be enough. Execution alone is also not going to be enough. And nothing can be done alone. So everything has to be together. So if we are really talking about future ready, what it really says is that we have to be ready with all these 4 pillars which are coming up over here. So thanks Shailesh once again for agreeing to be on this podcast. And with this, I sign off till I meet you all again with yet another stalwart giving up his or her perspective on the changes in the healthcare industry.
I think last thing that I would like to say is that, of course, there's a very famous book called Built to Last. Right? I think those days were very different. Now it is also one thing that the businesses have to remember, that they have to build it fast. So then
only you survive. Otherwise, it's not.
So that is, I think, a very important thing. Thank you for having me. Real pleasure, and
thank you
thank you very much for your time.